Wait for it to say it's recording.
Yep, says it.
Perfect. So thank you to everyone who sent in questions for the Black History Month Roundtable today. We're going to try and visit as many of them as possible, but for everyone who is on the call, you are also able to chime in at the end if we have time to ask any questions. One thing I'll say before I kick off and hand over to everyone else is that we know some of the topics brought up today might be quite triggering, so we want to make sure the safe is as comfortable as possible, but do only share what you feel comfortable with if you are answering a question or asking a question. So with all that done, I'll hand over to you guys. I just wanted to start off to give everyone a bit of background, and I'm going to do a short go around. If you could just share your names, pronouns, current role and the role before you came to Touchstone. Sharon, are you happy to start?
Yeah, I'm happy to kick off. So so morning, afternoon. It's afternoon, isn't it? Good afternoon, everyone. Sharon Brown, Business Development Director. My pronouns are she, her. Before I came to Touchstone, I used to work for one of Touchstone's partners, actually, Turning Lives Around. They are partnering with Touchstone on the Beacon service, for those of you that are aware of Beacon. So many moons ago, I worked with Jess Parker on that actual bid. I think it was about 2016, writing that bid. And that was probably my first introduction to Touchstone at the time. And I kind of had a bit of a crush on Touchstone ever since working on that bid. So finally, dreams came true and I came to work here. So that's me.
Fab, thanks, Sharon. Blessing, do you want to go next?
Hi everyone, I'm Blessing James. I used to work, before I came to Touchstone, at another charity to do with health services. But before that, I was in education, doing finance for over 12, 13 years.
Fab, thanks, Blessing.
Yeah.
Cheers. Suzanne, do you want to go next?
Hi, I'm Suzanne. Pronouns are she, her. I am one of two community wellbeing connectors, which is a brand new service to Touchstone. Before that, I worked at Live Well Leeds, and for over 20 years before that, I worked within education as an exams officer / exams manager.
Thanks, Suzanne. And Arfan, do you want to finish off?
Yeah, I'm Arfan Hanif, currently Chief Executive, pronouns him and he. Before I was an employee for Touchstone, I was a service user for Touchstone, but before that I was spent 20 years in different local authorities up and down the country doing different boring roles.
Thank you. I'm going to kick off with the next question soon, but just to say, I might be the sort of spotlight in Blessing, Suzanne, Sharon and Arfan at different points to just help it film better when you're speaking. So if someone's face suddenly fills the screen, you're all still there. That's just why. So the first question that someone has sent in is, what kind of barriers and challenges have you faced in your work life? Suzanne, do you want to kick off?
I think one of the main barriers I faced was the disbelief that I could do a managerial role, that I was capable of doing that, and the thought process behind that. So even though I was doing the job and I was proving that I could do it, there was I've never seen anybody of your colour race be in that position. I don't think you can do it. So therefore there was always somebody put above me that I would have to answer to. And that just over time, it just demoralises, because then you start to believe, well, maybe I'm not ready, maybe I can't do the job, when in fact you're doing it, smashing it, but you're not allowed to embrace that feeling of, I am managing this area. I don't know how the others have faced it, but it's always been not the limits I've put on myself, but the limits other people have put on me.
I've got to echo on that as well. My experience of I've qualified accountant for many years, and in the education sector, I was more qualified than a lot of people, and I was seeing other people be put forward for managerial posts, and not once did I get put forward, even though at certain times I was acting up and helping out when managers weren't around. And then when I look back into it, it's clear, because I was the only person who was Black in that environment, that obviously that played a major part in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I said, being the only one.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely think there's a thing, isn't there, about not always recognising that the barriers there at the time. So sometimes it's only in hindsight when you reflect. You've got some distance from whatever situation it's been, and it's only at that point that you suddenly go, oh, hang on a second. So I've had that same experience where I definitely have had the same job title as colleagues, but definitely not been regarded on the same level as that particular colleague, and also not had the same level of pay. It's transpired, or carried out the same duties and functions of that person, that they've been remunerated a lot higher than I have. And it's only you don't always know that, and you're just kind of operating blindly and feeling like there is a level playing field, but it becomes apparent with distance that there hasn't been. So that's a bit of a rude awakening sometimes, and makes you feel sad. I would say is the overwhelming emotion. I think sometimes you might start off with a little bit of angry feeling about it, but I think ultimately that winds its way down into just feeling sadness about the injustice of it, and the fact that you were operating in that environment, sometimes unaware that actually that's how you were being treated.
Yeah, I've got empathy with that, and you three haven't used the word. The word is racism. That is the challenge and barrier that people of colour experience, Black, Asian, and so on. So yeah, throughout my life, it's racism, and I'll say it as it is. The barriers being white people with power and privilege. That's been the barrier. And often these people are being less experienced, less qualified, but have used their power in a very inappropriate way. I spent nearly 20 years in local government, and it was very apparent to me, very incestuous. And if your face didn't fit, i.e. if you weren't white, you weren't going to move on. And the experience I had is the word glass ceiling. You'll get to a certain level and that's it. And I'll give an example. My last role, I had a chief officer, and when I arrived in the local authority, this person was basically an admin worker, and I was already a senior officer. Within a few years, this person was a chief officer because they were mates of a person, I'll use the word, I'm sorry, it might offend people, a redneck individual. So yes, so the barriers I face is racism, and often racism perpetrated by white people with power and privilege, and we have to say it as it is. And that is the reason why we experience such things, and we do internalize it, and that then often sometimes leads to self-sabotaging, as in you end up believing that you are of less worth. And that becomes a self-prophecy to some extent, because in a way that's their tactic. They want you to believe that you are less able and less equal, and that's part of their tactic. So I'll say it as it is, it's racism and white privilege and power that has been a real barrier for me, and the challenges that I've experienced in my career.
And so the problem is that when we've all faced it, and that when you then challenge that, when you question that, it's almost thrown back at you. And then it's all of a sudden it becomes my fault. It's our fault again. I'm the one raising it. Why are you the problem? Why are you always talking about this? And when in fact you go, well, I'm not. I'm talking very generally about a role, but it's always, well, you're bringing up race again. I'm not. It's the injustice
and not
that
being
I'm bringing
heard,
up.
and not being heard as well.
Yeah.
And then obviously when you're not heard, people can construe it as you being the aggressive one, the one that's always, you know, going to bring it up, the aggressive Black woman. But it's not being aggressive, it's being emotional because you are not being heard. And so many years of not being heard, it does come to that where it does grind you down, where you are seen as the aggressive one.
I think it's that thing, isn't it, where you'll hear often that, oh, you know, you're pulling the race card again, and you know, and my sentiment is that that is the last thing that you want to pull, because you're praying that what you're experiencing is anything other than based on your ethnicity. That is absolutely the last thing that you want to pull. But when you've eliminated every other reason, as Arfan said, you know, I'm as qualified or more qualified, got more experience, I've demonstrated I can do the role, yet you're still fixed in the position that you were when you arrived at a place, and people have flown past you, then you feel as though you have no other option but to bring it back to, well, there isn't anything else it could potentially be. And again, it's not about when you do raise it, it's with a reluctance, I'm sure, because as you've both described, you can end up being the person who's the problem, who's going on about it again, you know, who's using that as an excuse for your inadequacies, all sorts of things that get levelled at you if you start to express concern that the treatment is because of that. And that's what it is difficult.
Yeah, and they've been doing that for centuries. So, and it should not be seen in isolation. Like employment, it's happening in education, our parents, our ancestors. So this, I've got, you know, I don't bother. I don't have an issue raising the race card. We live in a racialized world. If you are Black African in this world, your life chances economically, socially, are really crap. And let's be brutally honest. So we do live in a racialized world where 15% of the world, which is white European, controls 80-90% of the world's resources. Of course, we live in a racialized world. You know, I've not made it. It's not my game. But often we then get accused of making it a race agenda. Well, it's not me who controls the agenda, who makes policies or government decisions. The reality is we do live in a racialized world, and employment experiences are never in isolation. And no doubt you've experienced racism in education, racism from the old coppers as well, law and order and all that type of stuff. So nothing is ever in isolation. So when people say you're raising the race card, well, yeah, of course I'm raising a race card. We live in a racialized world. It's obvious. It's inevitable. I'm saying the obvious. So I used to be afraid to use it, but I don't now, because it is what it is. Globally, we live in a racialized world.
I used to often say at work when an issue would come up, and I'd say, I do have my laminated race card and it's always with me. But if I need to use it, I will. But hopefully we can have an open discussion that means I don't have to. And it would always go, oh, right, well, obviously we're not doing that. And you think, right, well, okay, we've talked about, right, it's out there. Now let's get down to what we need to do. And it's, like I said, it's the micro, for me, it was the micro points of aggression. It's the assumptions that, I mean, I know I'd mentioned to many people, my manager who would question the fact that I listen to classical music, because Black people don't do that. And that thought, that belief from an educator to other young people that you wouldn't be doing this. Why would you be looking at subjects that would lead to STEM or medicine? Because you're not going to be good in that field. That's not something you want to do. And it's the assumption that's put on you that is really hard to shake off without positive role models, without people behind you to be able to push you through.
How scary is that, though? I mean, it's scary anyway, but from an educator. So these are people that you trust with your children, who you hope are going to motivate and encourage those same children. But actually, they've already put in place a lot of the boundaries that they're going to face as they move through their lives. already set them up, haven't they, for that? And we're not around to see that happening. That is terrifying.
And it's like I said, it starts. Nobody's born racist. You're taught to be intolerant.
Yeah.
And you would hope that the environment of education would broaden that and would show all aspects of humanity, but it doesn't, and it's just reinforced. And we don't even have those educators to fight back against that, because the system's built in that they're not there. And that's across Leeds. I think it was Birmingham that was able to say they had their first basically black taught subjects. But even that goes the other way, because then everything's centered on one thing and it needs to be a whole. That's how we need to be seen. I don't want to be seen as special because of that. I'm part of the community that I'm in, and it's just one part of me. But more often than not, it's brought to me that I am a woman of colour. It's expected. I'm a woman of colour. I'll be uneducated. That I won't have access to those portals to get me to the next level. And also the idea that I'm lazy, that's something. Well, you won't want to be there. You won't want to be in a position because you're going to be, well, you want to leave early, you want to do well, yeah, my work-life balance is important to me, and the fact that I make that known shouldn't be held against me.
Thanks everyone for that. I think that this leads really well on to the next question of, have these experiences of racism impacted on your identity, and if so, how? I mean, I'm assuming the first aspect of that question will be yes from what you've been saying, but if you want to explore more on how those kinds of experiences have impacted how you feel and present yourself in the world.
I think it's impacted a lot with having to conform and not be yourself, because being scared to be yourself. In my past, it was a case of, right, I'm Nigerian Scouser. I'm loud in general. I talk a lot in general. And then being in a workplace where it's like you're the only black person, for one. You're the black person, a woman, and you're not from Yorkshire. So it was almost like I dumbed myself down, my personality down, just to conform and try and stay under the radar as such. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely that. And again, I think it's only with hindsight that you realise how much you kind of bent yourself out of shape in order to just assimilate and to just fit in and to not draw attention. You don't always recognise it because it does become, this is just how you operate. It feels normal. But it's only when you come to work somewhere like Touchstone that you suddenly, again, it's like just fireworks.
Like a rebirth.
Yeah, you suddenly, and it sounds so dramatic, doesn't it? And, bit navel-gazing, but you do suddenly go, oh, this is how it feels to just bring your whole self to work and bring your whole Caribbean identity and bring your language and your food and your hair and how you operate and your traditions to be able to express that just openly and people be interested, not feel like we don't talk about that. Like that just needs to stay. That's just something that you do at home, but at work you're a bit of a facsimile of your real self in other organisations. And I have to genuinely say that I think Touchstone is a place where you can, and we talk about it all the time, but you completely bring your authentic self and feel proud of your authentic self instead of trying to hide it, like Blessing was saying. You're not kind of shoving it to one side 9 to 5. You're bringing it, and the workplace is richer for it. Your work is richer for it.
Most definitely. Like I must admit, I've said it to a few people. Like at the interview, my interview at Touchstone, I walked in and I just felt, wow, after the interview, this is where I want to be, you know, where I can go in and speak, obviously to our fan, about, you know, Liverpool and stuff like that. Like, I would not have ever dreamed of going to an interview and start talking about things that have got nothing to do with work, things that are important to me. And coming out of that interview, I was like, I want this job. I want to be in this place.
I think it was, like I say, it was a new experience of an interview, of somebody being interested in you.
Yeah.
And it was, yeah, there's a panel or there's a task, and we've done that, but actually tell us about you.
Yeah.
And genuinely feeling that somebody was interested, and they weren't just going, oh right, yeah, that's okay. I want to know about you and the good bits, the bad bits, what's brought you, what's your journey, because we all have that journey.
Definitely.
And that's how we relate to people, that's how we relate to each other. And for the first time in 30 odd years of working, to be able to literally just relax and go, this is who I am, and have it acknowledged as, and it's okay. Being you's okay. And it was just, it's so freeing. It's just been, yeah, I've only been at Touchstone for 7 months, but it's been the best 7 months, because it's just, like I say, being able to be me to other people. My family see this, but normally it's just hidden back. So yeah, beware, there's a lot coming.
Yeah, racism, question around how racism has impacted us as individuals. It's obviously caused detriment. I look back in my career, I was never one of them. And when you're trying to be one of them, you can suffer. And one of the reasons I ended up being sectioning was due to racism. You know, I'll be brutally honest, there's other factors, but racism was a key factor in that, because I couldn't be myself. And I found it very hard to conform. However, the experience of racism also had a positive impact in terms of raising consciousness of one's identity, one's heritage, one's history. You were brought up to see that the host culture was more superior and you were less. But then you realise, actually, you've nicked all our sciences and mathematics and arts and stuff. And Europe is based on a big theft of Africa, Asian culture, and so on. And so in a way, the other side of obviously racism is anti-racism. So in a way, there are benefits of experiencing that racism, because from that you had consciousness, and from that consciousness you had more self-esteem. And then once you experience any form of oppression, you tend to be more educated. You need to find out why this is happening. And that develops as a consciousness, unlike others who may not experience that type of oppression, who just continue to live life, not fully understanding their history, their role in their existence in this life, in this world. So racism for me, in my teens, I had a real interest in concepts of Black power, Black consciousness, Malcolm X, Public Enemy, things like that, which gave me a lot of self-esteem, being a person of colour and recognising that people of colour have contributed to the success of the globe that we're in, whilst Western Europe is fairly recent in terms of its contribution to the world, which took a bit of time, because when I was young, one didn't have that value of your own self, because you were brought up to value white culture as being superior. But I don't see that anymore. I think people of colour have to recognise that their heritage is of high civilization, which was taken away from us through colonialism and slavery. So the key thing is, as time has gone on, we've educated ourselves and raised our consciousness and made us, I think, hopefully we become better people.
That's really interesting. Sorry, Suzanne, you finish. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and Arfan's right, it's about education. A lot of it has had to be self-education, and it needs to become more mainstream, and it needs to start in the home and continue outside of the home, with the young people coming up, because they're experiencing a different type of racism.
Yeah.
And there is a more blended mix that leaves a lot of young people isolated from their own communities, from their own ethnicities, because maybe they're not sure, maybe they're raised by a parent from a different ethnicity. So it's being able to have access to that information out there. But they need to know that there's places that they can go to get that.
I've got a lot of confidence in this generation, though, where they are speaking up. They're literally, I'm looking at my child who's 13 and she's telling me, no, I've told my teacher I don't agree with that, because why are we only learning about slavery? I want to learn about Black history current, not just slavery. So in a way, I'm like so proud that we have got this next generation who are not just there to be seen, they're speaking, they're being heard, and hopefully that's going forward is the way, we can make sure we get what we need for our young kids.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
So we've fought so far.
It is slowly moving forward, because my daughter's 10, and she brought home a poetry book from school by Benjamin Zephaniah not so long ago. Now, in a million years, that would have never happened when I was 10 years old, and I took a photograph of the book. I was so blown away, and I messaged her teacher to thank her for having that resource at the school, because she saw someone who looked like her, who's, writes poetry in patois, that, we would just never have experienced that. And my daughter is so conscious now that someone said to her, oh, you're brown. And she said, I'm not brown, I'm Black. I'm a Black girl. That's what I am. I wouldn't have said that at her age, at that tender age of 10. And the schools are trying. I know there's a long, long way to go. Not all schools. I mean, I've heard this morning on the radio that there are no plans to teach Black history, Black British history in schools. So what Suzanne was saying about, a lot of it has to happen at home is still the case. And so be it, we need to keep doing that. But some schools are making strides, which I think is amazing.
Yeah. And like I said, they also need to have those teachers. We need Black teachers. We need Asian teachers. We need Southeast Asian teachers. They are out there, and they need to be the ones teaching the youth that are coming through. They need to see it reflected, and that's not what's happening. So again, even if it was on the curriculum, they're being taught Black history by a white person, and you go, but this isn't part of your history. And it's just not that everybody needs to have that, but it's nice to see it. As a child sat in a desk looking forward at that senior person, it's nice to have something to reach for. I could be that teacher. I could be that lecturer. I could be that person in charge, because I see it reflected.
I think so. I mean, I don't know if my daughter's school is especially progressive, but they had someone come in and talk to them about the history of Benin and do, some reenactments. Now, that is unbelievable. Again, I was on the phone to the school. Oh my God, this is amazing. And they're probably tired of me now. But I feel it requires some acknowledgement so that they do it more and more and more. And my daughter's school is not very mixed. She's one of a handful of Black children at that school. So for them to recognise that this is something that they need to do, I do think is so important, and I'm hopeful that more schools will do it.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned having those role models in a very young age. If you don't see those role models, it will have an impact. But also it goes beyond history. It's about general subject matters. We talk about maths. Well, maths is not European. Algebra wasn't a European either. As far as I know, it's algebra. It's an Arab algebra. So often people assume that even science, people think it was Galileo who said that the world was round. No, it was other people who talked about the world being round before the Europeans. So it's recognising things like science and mathematics as well when that's being taught, and recognising, well, the basis of mathematics actually originates outside of Europe. Rather than just talking about history as it is, it's recognising that other mainstream subjects, you need to also highlight that the origins of these subjects themselves actually don't originate from Europe. So often that is misled, because the Europeans will be still stuck with these Roman numerals, and try getting some equations out of these outdated Roman numerals. You wouldn't get far, would you? So it's recognising that Europe has progressed its education system by the education system of Africa and Asia, and the first university was actually in Africa, not in Europe. And often that's not taught. And often when we talk about Black history, it's about the Black sort of movements like Malcolm X and slavery. Actually, that is just one little element of Black history. I want to know about the kings and queens of Africa and the civilization, the art, the science, the mathematics. So often Black history is portrayed in terms of that oppression of history. Slavery, as one of you mentioned earlier, actually is far more than that. It's Black history is not just about Malcolm X and Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks and so on, because that's actually white history. That's white history. That's white racism.
And when that's getting taught to our kids, it's like that's why they're not engaging, because they don't want to hear the depressing part of it. They want to hear the uplifting part of it, as in, as you say, algebra. Where did it originate from? So it does need to be a shift.
Black history it's the history of mankind. And that's how it needs to be taught, almost, of these are these people, this is where they came from, this was their culture, and this is how it moved forward. And we've taken history from a point of the Middle Ages, where it was whitewashed, it was all the colour was taken out of those leading figures, and that's the portrayal that's just been repeated and repeated and repeated. And it's only, and I say this because I'm doing a course at the moment and I'm re-educating myself, but realising that the myths and the histories, they're based in Ethiopia, in Libya. These were Black people who were doing stuff, who were creating. And it's, like I say, just been over the millennia, that colour, that ethnicity is just being stripped away. But it's getting it back and being vocal about it. And I will tell everybody who listens of the histories and the value that ethnicity has in the world.
That's just made a really good point in the comments. Sorry, where she said about it being the story before we were slaves, and I think that just covers it really, doesn't it? That's what we want to hear about, and about Black history not being as a standalone. It's just history, isn't it? And talking about the contributions of Black people throughout that time as an integral thing, not as this is what we do for 1 month a year, but how is it integral to everything that we do now?
We're kind of forging ahead into the next section by talking about this, because our fans talked about both the consciousness raising education that helped him forge a path through, and also all talking about the structural changes you want to see within education. Another question we had sent in was, do you have any thoughts on how you overcame the racism you faced, how you kind of forged paths through to create your own place within leadership positions, and are there any structural changes that you want to see to make this easier for other people?
I was structured. I had a manager who who recognised what I was doing and who saw the value that I could add to his team, and his belief in what I'd suppressed, what I knew I could do, allowed me to actually be that person. And it was through that of being able to have my voice and speak up and know that I was going to be allowed to talk. And it grew from there. So in meetings, it was, well, does anybody have it? I could voice that opinion, knowing that I'd be allowed to say it, and it wouldn't be, well, we're not going to listen to you, or be cut off. And I think it's recognizing the qualities that your staff have. And that only happens if you're working alongside them, you know them, and you can see what they have to add.
For me, it's about having self-esteem.
It's hard to have self-esteem though when it's
grinded.
Yeah.
It's
And
grinded down.
And yeah,
worked
down. Yeah.
Is that self-esteem and confidence. So I have now self-esteem in terms of my identity, and I have a sense that actually I'm better. I have to be better because I have to, because the challenges why others people may have privilege. I have to really be better in terms of what I do as an individual, like most people of colour, in order to succeed, just to be equal. And for me, structurally, it's that collective consciousness that I'm not alone. I come from a city of Stoke-on-Trent, which is a bit of a redneck city, where so you're very much a minority. So he's recognising that collective consciousness. Actually, we've got a collective experience of racism, colonialism, slavery, and so on, and that's where our strength comes from. So the white slave masters, colonialists, their main policy was rule and divide. So it's recognising, well, one way of structurally challenging this is to act as a collective, not as individuals. And so something, as time has gone on, it's recognising if you're going to tackle something structurally, you have to do it as a collective, recognising you have a common experience. If you go it alone, you won't succeed. If you look at the civil rights movement or the Black Power movements in America, it was a collective. Yes, individuals were involved, but they were successful as a collective, not only bringing Black people together, but also white people and other groups which had the right consciousness, and that's where the strength came from. So in order to tackle something structurally, I think you have to do it collectively, but also there needs to be better representation. So in Touchstone, I'm hoping that we are more representative of the communities that we serve. But I often hear the term diversity inclusion from other organisations, but I hear it from people who are of white privilege, who just say it from their mouths, but very little representation. I always say you can only have equity without, only with representation. And the only way you can have representation is people have power. You need to abdicate your power. You need to shift because resources are limited. So, so if you want to have diversity inclusion, I'll do one then. So people like me or people like us can take the opportunity because because resources are limited. So abdicate your power, and then we might have a chance of some equity.
Yeah, I think I often agree with the collective approach, but I do also take examples from you and from other colleagues where I know in the past I would have been quite timid or maybe a bit reticent to call out racism where I saw it, sometimes through just sheer shock and kind of a delayed response. And I know that the thing that changed my approach was a white colleague actually calling out someone who had said something racist, possibly unintentional, but had said, yeah, he's a big Black man, but he's really nice. And someone recognised straight away the inherent racism in that statement and said, but what do you mean? But he's really nice. And got that person to just stop and think about their words and what that actually meant to the Black people in that room. And it was at that point that I thought, one of the things that you do, it's a bit like how do you eat an elephant, isn't it? One spoon at a time. And what you have to do, white, Black, whoever you are, where you see racism in the workplace, in your personal life, is to call it out, have those conversations, take someone to one side, explain why what they've said is racist, why it's unacceptable. They may or may not be aware, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
After the conversation with you, they ought to be aware. And I do think it is about that immediately calling out that behaviour. And I think that's how you start to stop that happening.
I've been in a situation where in a team meeting with leadership, and one of the leaders actually referred to someone as colour. And I could see around the room, some people were like, oh, she should not have used that. There's a Black person in the room. And I tend to use a lot of humour. So I turned around to the senior leader and said, oh, what colour was he? Was he green? And then it went silent. And then there was a few giggles from people that obviously got what I meant. And I actually explained, I said, to be honest, to use the word colour, you could have meant any colour. Do you mean Black? And then afterwards, I obviously took the person aside and just said, I was very uncomfortable with it. And I could see other people were uncomfortable with it. So I had to bring it up in that situation to address it to the room as well, because other people were thinking it. So it's more about having that confidence to basically call it out when it needs to be called out. Yeah. And I do get, obviously, people in them situations feel awkward. And it's overcoming that awkwardness to say, a wrong's a wrong.
Yeah. I mean, it's okay to inquire. If somebody asks a question, that's fine. That's how they're educating themselves. Mm-hmm. But there is that difference between somebody inquiring and somebody using it as a weapon.
Yeah.
And it's, like I say, totally correct, Sharon. It's being able to have that confidence to go, actually, let me stop you. You've just said this. Did you realise what the connotations were? Do you understand what you mean by that? And the majority of the time, most people go, I didn't. Yeah. Right, oh, okay, thank you. But then if they don't, you go, well, that's a choice. You're making a choice to do this. And I can make a choice to interact with you or not interact with you, because there's only so much I can do. And that's why I think we come back to the collective of them being able to go, well, this is my experience. I can share that experience. And then as a group, you can then go, right, where do we move forward with that idea? Where do we move forward with challenging this belief or this action?
Yeah, and I wanted to add, obviously, to talk about structural change, only possible if you've got allies.
Yeah.
When I mean allies, white allies, they're there to support you. So I think throughout my life, the people who supported me the most, where I suffered racism, was white people. Sometimes it wasn't Black or Asian people. It was allies who realised actually this is wrong, and that's really, really important. And that's really important in the context of Touchstone. We've got allyships, people who recognise, well, this is wrong, and call it out. So people who might be white, who might say, well, that's out of order. And that's really important, and recognising that allyship is critical, because the issue of racism, it's not my issue. I've not created it, and I don't belong. It's actually it's mainly the white power which created racism predominantly in this world, and we need white allies to actually support that to make that change. So it's not just seen as it's a Black or an Asian thing or a people of colour thing. Actually, we rely on our allies. And if you look at what happened in South Africa, there was many white allies who were in the anti-apartheid movement, and that was one of the reasons why apartheid ended. And if you look at the civil rights movement, there were many white people who were allies of the civil rights movement. That's really, really important, because there are many white people who think racism's abhorrent and it's wrong and it shouldn't, and they say it's not in my name.
Yeah.
Sorry, my mic's playing up. I was trying to unmute myself there and then re-muted myself. Just before we move on to the next two questions, which are the final two questions, Stephanie has written something in the comments box, which I wanted to share with everyone and see if you have any thoughts around. Stephanie noted that communities also need to stop internal racism and discrimination, as power rights can be just as harmful.
Definitely.
Does anyone want to chime in on that before we move on?
Most definitely.
Yeah, racism is not just a simple white and black thing.
Yeah.
Racism manifests itself in different ways, and let's be honest, in terms of slavery from Africa, some of the Arabs were involved,
Yeah.
and there were also African tribes that were involved in
the Benin,
this as well. So there was collusion that took place. Often people don't talk about it, but the slave masters and the colonists, they got away with it because they had people from our own communities involved who were colluding in this. So it does happen. So yeah, it's not a simple black and white. There is racism which manifests itself at different
definitely
areas of the world. And my origin is the Indian subcontinent. My family originated from the Indian side of Kashmir, and nearly 3 million people died during the partition due to communal conflict. People killed each other, whether you're Muslim, Sikh, or Hindu, and they were the same race. They were essentially the same race of Hindustanis, but they killed each other due to sectarian violence. Yes, the British stirred the issues there, but it's still endemic. So yeah, it's sometimes. Yes, Steph's right. It's sometimes too simple that just to say it's a black and white thing. Unfortunately, racism manifests itself in all aspects, but the big difference in terms of other forms of racism, there's a strong power dynamic in terms of racism, in terms of white racism, the history, colonialism, capitalism, economics, and so on. So there is a slight difference and a nuance when we look at white European racism compared to other forms of racism.
Blessing, were you quite keen to chime in then, or are you happy to move on?
I'm happy to move on. I was just going to echo what Arfan was.
Arfan covered it for you.
Yeah.
The last two questions now that were sent in by a staff member. The first one is there a particular person who has inspired your leadership role?
I'm going to chime in on that one. Not your usual one, but it's my daughter. When having children, you see life from a different perspective, like what you want for your future children. And it was only until I had my daughter and I was obviously in a position where I was in the education sector working, and I got grinded down, and she's seen me mentally break down. So she inspired me to just like pick myself up and show her my worth, because that ultimately is, what I need to do. Yeah. What my power.
I guess mine is a bit is similar, because I would have to say that mine is my mum, purely because when we were children, she would literally physically fight for us, because we were subject to lots of racism as small children, which is shocking really when I look back. So my mum constantly had to fight for us, was constantly at the school arguing with the teachers about our treatment. And so I kind of felt like I owed it to her to really try to push myself should just do well, because I saw a lot of the sacrifices and a lot of the struggles as a single parent of Black children growing up in a predominantly white environment. Just the daily struggles that she had and the grind. And I felt, and I think my brother probably feels the same, that we owed it to her, if nothing else, to, really try to strive and do as well as we could.
I was going to say, yeah, very similar, Sharon. Growing up in Seacroft in the 70s to a mum, single parent, and I was always that child. I was the nosy child. I asked all the really awkward questions, and just knowing the struggles that she went through and seeing those struggles every day, of her being spat at in the streets, of her having to physically fight police, head teachers, having to do that every day, and the strength that she showed, and going, if she can do that, I can do anything. I can be better than that. And I'm gonna take those values and just run with it. And yeah, she just enabled me in every way to be able to do that, to be the person I am today.
I'll be a bit different. Got a few role models. So yeah, I'm gonna Chuck D.
Yeah. Okay.
From Public Enemy. Growing up as a teenager, and the words from that particular rapper gave me that consciousness. Those words, that self-esteem, politicized me. So Chuck D. But the person I'd say who I've met in real life, who probably has been a role model, was my predecessor, Alison Lowe. So the first time a leader who had confidence in me, and a Black woman who, despite her difficulties, has succeeded, and also helped many people in her life. So I see her as a role model and a guide, and one of the reasons why I decided to pluck up the courage and go for the role of chief executive. It would not have been possible if not for Alison Lowe. So I'd probably say my predecessor is my role model, and if you want to blame anyone for I've taken up this role, blame Alison Lowe.
Okay.
Yeah.
A real mixed bag of responses there. Thanks, everyone. The last question that we've got written down from people is, what ethos do you apply to your leadership roles? I feel like you touched on this a bit by describing your heroes, but
bringing yourself to the team. With my team, I literally feel that, individually we all collectively work well because we bring individual strengths. So for me, it is being individual, but as a collective.
I could say ethos. I always behind me is the great, wonderful Maya Angelou, and I often think, especially sat here, I just think it's those wonderful words. I am a woman phenomenally, and that's through the years and those ancestors that have made me here. And I just think I am strong and I can do anything.
Yes.
And that's just carried me through. If those people can carry those struggles, my struggles I can carry along and ease the path for my daughter and her daughters and her daughters. We are phenomenal.
I want to click my fingers to that one.
Yeah, phenomenal. We rise, she would say.
I think for me, and especially since I've come to Touchstone, my ethos is just about total honesty, and that might include vulnerability, and that might include uncertainty. But I think if we are always honest and transparent and open with colleagues, partners, commissioners, whoever it might be, I just feel that that sits better with me in my work life. And, you know, don't worry, I'm not going to be, you know, spilling everything right now. But if I wanted to, I know that I could. And that I would be really safe doing that with the people in this room and the people in this organisation, because I feel it's probably for the first time, a safe space to do it. So I definitely feel like that is my whole ethos in the workplace: complete honesty, as much as you can.
For me, it's about being authentic all the time, so linked to being honest. But being authentic also having respect for all colleagues and recognise everyone has something to bring and talent, but also recognising anything's a possibility. So I've gone past this. Anything's possible if you believe in it, and from my own experience, that things that I've ended up doing, thinking, how's that possible? But so I don't consider impossibilities no more. Anything is possible.
Yeah. Yes, Steph, big up the Touchstone
Big up
family.
the Touchstone family.
I just wanted to say on the back of that Steph had added into the chat that her late dad used to say there is nothing such as calm, which really echoes a lot of what everyone's been saying here. I think it's a really gorgeous sentiment to share. Thank you so much, everyone. Has everyone got time to stay around for a little bit longer in case there are questions from people on the chat? Are you four okay to do that?
Yeah.
Does anyone else have some questions they'd like to chime in with that we've not already covered? Just going to double check I can see all your hands. I'm not seeing any hands go up, but if I'm missing it, do just shout up if you want to.
I can't see.
I kind of got one. So
That's Rhiannon.
Oh, sorry, hello.
There you go, you popped up now.
I mean, I don't know how related this is, but I guess sort of like in white circles when it comes to recruitment, I keep hearing a lot that like black and brown communities are hard to reach, which is obviously is a myth. I think it's that you're not doing the right things to reach black and brown communities to actually get people recruited and into those positions of power. I guess as people that, you know, are black and brown and in positions of power, like what advice have you got for white girls to like do better at that?
Thanks, Rhiannon.
There's a myth about hard to reach.
Yeah.
Years ago, I was at a police conference, and it was about, God, you're very hard to reach. I said, well, not when you arrest us. You're really hard. We're easy to find then when you want to arrest us. But when it comes to opportunities and jobs, we're all of a sudden very hard to reach. Same with the health system. Oh, you're really hard to reach. Not when we get sectioned. You find us very quickly when you want to section us. So it's a myth, and it's to do with power. So no community is hard to reach. It's the people who have position of influence and power that they make their decision, and might be laziness on their part, but should they wish to engage with the community and there's a will, of course they're going to do it. So it's one of the biggest myths, and for years I've challenged this hard to reach sort of myth. You know, when you want to contact us and get us, you know, it's like they're really hard to reach in schools and educate. Well, we want to exclude us and suspend us. We're very quickly to reach then. So it's to do with recognizing should you wish to engage, you're going to engage if it's in your interest. So the biggest myth is hard to reach communities. There's no such thing as a hard to reach community. There are people in positions of power who are isolated in their ivory towers. They're hard to reach.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it as well is about if you're thinking as a black person about joining an organisation or taking up a service or buying a product or whatever way you're going to interact with an organisation, one of the first things that you might do, especially now, is you're going to look on the website. You're going to have a look at the resources. You're going to have a look at how this company presents itself, who their trustees are. And if you look at that resource and there is no one that looks like you, or if there is, it's very obviously a kind of a stock image, you know, and it doesn't represent the workforce, then you're probably going to keep on scrolling. And the organisations that you do engage with are the ones where they are actively already have people that look like you in those roles. It certainly was the case for me coming to Touchstone. I'm always banging on about it, but I'll say it again. I looked on the website, I saw tons of people that were black and brown. I saw loads of culturally specific information that said to me, this is a space where you can operate really easily, and this is somewhere you're going to want to be. And I think that extends to trying to recruit, you know, making sure that the panels are representative, making sure that the recruitment is completely colourblind, it's completely anonymous. There are tons of organisations today still recruiting where you know everything about that person, name, ethnicity, age. You shouldn't know any of that stuff because, like it or not, there is so much unconscious bias. So I think it is, you know, a lot of the stuff that we're already doing at Touchstone. So I would say that anything where you're trying to engage with communities and you're putting out marketing, it sounds so obvious, but just make sure that those communities are reflected throughout the whole process. And that goes such a long way. You don't have to say anything else.
Like I said, it's that weird thing of, and obviously back to education, my biggest experience, it was that thing of not being, there was no people of colour recruited in any post, and to be the only black member of staff within a workforce of 180. And it was that question of, we are a big multicultural city with numerous universities that do PGCSE that are out there. Why are these people not being recruited in? And then it comes down to, well, what are the questions they're asking? What are you using to shortlist? And it's like, you're choosing not to have those people. It's not that I think people aren't going for those jobs, it's that you're shortlisting them out. And therefore it just propels itself. And it's so hard. Like I say, I've worked within schools. I know somebody's just mentioned it in the comments where they don't, sorry Katie, that they don't know what Black History Month is because the schools choose to go, well, I don't really know about it. It's difficult. It's only a month. It's something else to add into the curriculum. We won't bother. And it's not something to not bother about. It's actually then find those questions, go out into your community and ask the community, do you want to come in and talk about that? And then that'll spread the information. But instead it's easier to go, well, we just won't deal with it. We'll move on. It's their problem, not ours.
Just reading on Katie's
I was just
comment.
about to read Katie. Shall I read it out?
Yeah.
Thanks. So Katie Tolman has written in the chat a question. I ran a youth group earlier this week and we were talking about Black History Month. It was quite shocking that all of the young people in colleges didn't even know that it was a thing. What topics would you recommend us bringing to a group for young people to educate them on Black history that isn't focused on slavery and civil rights? The group is a mix of Black, Asian and white people aged 18 to 25. And she says she's just keen to learn but isn't sure where to start.
I touched on this earlier on when I said about with young kids, young people, they're not engaging with Black History Month because it's all about slavery. And the depressing part of it. So for me, with my children, I focus on things that they're interested in. What are my kids interested in at the moment? Dance, music. Then go back and look at the history of dance and music and bring that. So in order to engage with young people, you have to recognise what do they want to engage in? Are they about? And I think that's a starting point. And that's where we're going wrong with educating with Black history.
I did almost the opposite with my daughter, who's very, very advanced of age. But it was that thing of we went classics, let's go back to the beginnings and let's talk about that, and let's look at imagery and discuss imagery and have those open discussions. And my mother always had and I'm sure a lot of people recognize this, that image, that white Jesus that was up on the wall. And it just started there, that thing of, right, well, where did he come from? If he came from anywhere, where would he be? What's different with that image? Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Let's talk about this. Let's talk about the Bible then. That was a big thing in the house as well. Well, if we're talking about Bible stories, well, where was it all based? Let's put people in their context. Where are they?
Yeah.
And then you can take it forward from there and go, right, well, if you spool it forward, but it's talking about it, and like Blessing says, it's picking up whatever they want to talk about. If they're interested in music, right, well, let's pick a genre, let's take it forward from there, or take it back from there.
Yeah,
definitely. If it's art, take it forward or take it back, but everything has a root in something. But it's they will lead it rather than what do you take to them. They will tell you, well, I'm really interested in this.
Yeah.
Where did that come from?
I think as well, it's about making it really relevant to the young people. So if one of the things that tends to happen around Black History Month is we tend to get a lot of American Black history, but there's a lot of rich UK Black history. There's a lot of local Leeds Black history. That if young people that you're working with recognise the localities or some of the names, for example, Steph put out a brilliant email this week about her own personal history. Yeah. That has a lot of resonance in Leeds, and starting with something like that, her sister being the first Black head teacher, how brilliant, very local, the stuff around David Olusoga, that stuff that's so local, even down to music. So one of the big things for me when I was growing up, and I had my little cassette player from Littlewood's catalogue that I played to death, and I bought an album by Karen Wheeler called UK Black. Oh. And that was and I still listen to that to this day because it was the first one that I could really identify with. Oh my God, she's talking about me. It wasn't American, sorry, Arfan. It wasn't Chuck D, but it really felt like, gosh, she's talking to me, this woman, because her experience is my experience. So I think if you can make it really local and you're talking about people from the local area, you're talking about people who are only, of the current generation even, and are doing things, what contributions Black British people have made. And there's millions of brilliant examples. And young Black British people, they're probably not interested in people of my age or older, but there are loads of young Black British people now doing brilliant
influencing things.
I think talking about that stuff would really help and definitely play the album UK Black.
But also talk about one's family's history, because it seems a bit detached when you seems over there as slavery, something big, something it's like some GCSE history type of stuff. But when you start talking about your own history, your ancestors, where did you come from, where did your grandparent come from, and if you go back, where did they originate from, what was their origins? So you'll find people from the Caribbean, a lot of their origins from West Africa. So it's just some of that history, then people can get interested in thinking, well, this is my identity, because sometimes it can be quite detached. But also, which I mentioned earlier, rather than talking about Black history, you might want to say, what's the origins of maths? What's the origins of science? Rather than saying the history of slavery, the history of civil rights, which that's how it's sort of couched at the moment. So for me, it's you make it almost less about Black history or history of slavery generally, but also family. People need to recognise actually we all have a history. It's not some detached course. We come from somewhere. If you look way back, your origins, you think actually my origins are somewhere else, from the Caribbean to West Africa and so on.
I'm not sure if everyone can see the chat, but there's a few comments in response. So Katie's replied to say that she really appreciates all these ideas about local history and young British people, and that it's an LGBTQ group, they've also been looking at Black queer figures from history as like a way in, which sounds great. Also, Rhiannon said, no kids want to talk about maths though, Arfan.
You'd be surprised.
Yeah, you'd be
It's
surprised,
so
actually,
interesting
yeah.
though,
Yeah,
the history of numbers.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
My
don't know, I'm
10-year-old is a bit
I'm
of
with
a.
Rhiannon on that one.
I'm sorry, my 10-year-old is a bit of a. He's obsessed with numbers. So yeah. So learning him and telling him about where maths did come from is something that he was like, oh my God. He's yeah. So yeah, you'd be surprised.
and it's how you couch it. If you say
Mhm.
numbers, it's like mathematics key for the pyramids. You
Mhm.
don't have the pyramids without mathematics, yeah, pyramids were around 4,000 or 5,000 years, and Europe didn't even know what a wheel was. So,
Yeah.
so these and pyramids come from Africa, Sudan, Egypt. So they use quite advanced mathematical formula to produce things like the
Yeah, to
pyramids.
engineer what they needed to do. Yeah. Mm.
Stephanie's also added that it would be helpful to reduce the negative connotations and start to focus on the positives, as you guys have been saying. So, for example, focusing on original inventors, and she knows that Jack Daniels was actually created by a black man as well.
Yeah.
Which I don't know.
Do it.
More power to Jack.
Yeah, good stuff.
Does anyone else have any other questions before we end the meeting? Can't see any popping up, but do chime in if you want to. If there's no one else, then shall we wrap up for the day? But thank you so much to the four of you for all your insights. It's been such an insightful and powerful conversation. I really enjoyed being a part of it. I will be sending this out to everyone afterwards, and I'll be putting it on our YouTube channel as well, so it will be available internally and externally.